Hi, my name is Anne McElhinney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
It's week 89. That's 1 year, 9 months, and 1 week since the 2 weeks to flatten the curve lockdown. And we're really lucky that we're finished with the whole COVID panic and scares, aren't we, Anne? And
yeah, it's great.
It's great.
Really
it only took 2 weeks, and I don't know why we're still talking about it. Anyway, what else is on the show today, Anne?
And social media still want to suppress the truth about the Hunter Biden and Biden family.
Yep, it's unbelievable. 1 year after it was aired, one of our podcasts that features Mr. Hunter Biden and his various misdemeanors and crimes, high crimes and misdemeanors, has been banned by YouTube. So we will bring you the details on that, and we have exciting news talking to that about our My Son Hunter movie, the movie that you're funding to help expose those very Biden family crimes and Biden family corruption.
And later we're going to be joined by our friend, the data expert Justin Hart, who reveals the truth behind the COVID hysteria to talk about how to pronounce Omicron. And if we even need to learn to pronounce Omicron.
Yeah.
Yes, and the New York Times explains why people are moving to Texas, and you might find their conclusions rather surprising.
Yes, not so much a conclusion as more of a bald-faced lie. But anyway, we'll get to that. And the greatest photo of the 20th century is an amazing surprise. And Josh Fox, the liar behind the Gasland fake documentary, is against capitalism, of course, for everyone else except himself. So we'll be examining his anti-capitalist credentials later on. So YouTube, we have our podcast video 64, podcast 64, which the title is Hunter Biden's Emails, Fracking and Obamagate. Co-writer Brian Godawa joins us. So it's about Obamagate. It's about Hunter Biden and it's about fracking, and YouTube have banned it. YouTube have removed it because
what did we do wrong, Philip?
I think it violates harassment, threats, and cyberbullying policy. Top Cat, do you think
would you call me a harasser, a threater, a threatener, or a cyberbullier? Or you look at Mr. Top Cat. There's no way that that's true, right, Top Cat?
Let him speak.
Go on then. Tell us what they said then.
They said, we know this is disappointing, but it's important to us that YouTube is a safe place for all. If content breaks our rules, we remove it. If you think we've made a mistake, you can appeal and we'll take another look. They just don't tell us how it violated the policy.
Kind of an interesting one, actually. So you get these violations, threatened,
Yes.
Thrown at you, and then if you were to try to be good, you don't even know where you went wrong.
Yes,
because they don't tell you.
Yeah. So then we appealed, and we have reviewed your appeal for the following content.
This is what they
video
said.
Number 64, podcast 64, Hunter Biden's emails. This is a year ago, by the way. Fracking and Obamagate's co-writer Brian Godawa joins us. And we've reviewed your content carefully and confirmed that it violates our harassment, threats, and it took them 2 days to review it, by the way, and cyberbullying policy. So again, very
and interesting how this affects your channel. We won't be putting your content back up on YouTube. If your appeal was for a warning, you will not be given another warning in the future. If your appeal was for a strike, the strike will remain on your channel.
So basically what they're saying is, you do this again, which we won't tell you what you're doing, then we're going to basically ban you from YouTube. This is what we're up against. This is why we're making the Hunter Biden movie, actually. Because YouTube and Twitter and all the other social media outlets got together to ban any mention of the Hunter Biden scandal in the run-up to the last election. That's how the election was rigged. The New York Post had his laptop, had all his emails, covered it all. They stopped it being sent around. They stopped it being circulated. They suppressed the story. And then the other media outlets supported that and didn't investigate the Hunter Biden story. You know it's true because they didn't try and debunk the Hunter Biden story, because you know that once they tried to debunk it, that it would be shown to be true.
So that's the bad news. So that's the bad news. But here's the really good news. We're fighting back, and we're going to get this story out to people. And here's really good news. We have actually now managed to reach over $2 million in donations from you for this project, because people like you feel really strongly that something really terrible happened here in the suppression of this story prior to the election. It's like a first in American history.
And don't forget.
And people really, really feel bad about it. So we have now raised over $2 million. And by the way, money is coming in because obviously, as you know, this week was Giving Tuesday. I know a lot of you gave, and we are so grateful to you. And those of you who didn't give and forgot to give, there's still time yet.
Yeah, so don't forget, this is a movie, and it's a movie with actors and Robert Davi is directing it. The great movie legend is directing it. Lawrence Fox is playing Hunter Biden. Gina Carano is in it, which is amazing that we get actors of this caliber. John James, who played Jeff Colby in Dynasty, he's playing Joe Biden. There's a picture of him. He just grew. We're just back from filming in Serbia. He grew into the role in such an amazing way. It's a great movie. Thank you very much for helping us reach the 2 million milestone.
But also, as we come to the end of the year, I mean, just one other thing we wanted to say in general about our work, and the work that we do, all the things that we've done, particularly, things to do with like the Gosnell movie and the Gosnell book, about stories out about fracking, about the energy issue. And we do it because of help from you and this podcast, which we produce every week. We cannot do it without your help, and it's coming to the end of the year. So maybe you've had a good year. I hope you have. And if you have, you want to not be giving too much money to the IRS, and you want to maybe give a little bit more to us, and you can do that. We're a tax deductible 501c3, so it's
how do people give money?
People can give very easily online to the unreportedstorysociety.com, unreportedstorysociety.com. We're a very small 501c3, but my God, we do really big things. Our projects are very, very big. So whatever you can do to help, we would be so grateful.
Yeah, as Anne saying, this week was Giving Tuesday, but we accept donations every day of the year. And
it's always giving someday.
The Hunter Biden project is a 2.5 million project. We've raised 2 million now. It's an amazing amount of money. It's great, but we do need your help. So please give what you can. Go to the unreportedstorysociety.com or go to mysonhunter.com as well.
Yes, exactly.
That'll take you to the same place, mysonhunter.com. It'll take you to the movie. What else is on the show, Anne?
So now we're going to go over to the interview we did earlier with Justin Hart, our friend Justin Hart, who has, who is a data guy, but through this pandemic became this superstar by being a guy who just looked at the facts of what was being reported about what was going on with infections, with cases, and he found some anomalies. He found some things that just made absolutely no sense.
No sense from a data point of view. He took the data and looked at what people were saying the data meant. He was going, the data doesn't mean that. That the data doesn't back up anything you've said. So and that had very serious consequences for society and for freedom. So let's go over to the interview that we did earlier with him and hear the latest about the Omicron and whether we should be scared of Omicron and whether we're going to need a new Greek alphabet.
So now we are joined by our friend Justin Hart.
Justin is a data expert who became an unlikely COVID truth war.
An accidental COVID celebrity.
Yes, just by trying to match the data with the measures that are being taken and finding the gaps in knowledge and the gaps in justification for what was happening given the data. So
we wanted to start by asking you about the latest crazy thing. But first of all, welcome, Justin.
Thanks, you guys. Great to be with you. Yeah, COVID took away my entire consulting clientele, who were all very leisure-based. I was doing data analytics and dashboards from. So I hope they'll forgive me if I stick it to them by using their lockdowns to make myself even more successful, because I'm not going to stand for it. There was that moment in time when we were all stuck inside. Our plows were, if you will, out in the field, and they were not allowing us to get to them, or for that matter, to go wakeboarding on the ocean in Huntington Beach or what have you. Yep. They padlocked my kids' favorite swing at their park. And so I've just had enough. I was in a lucky position where I had nothing to lose. So stuck my neck out because the data didn't hold up to what they were saying. It still doesn't. And yet the panic, as you can see over the weekend, was very prominent. And it's old hat now.
Well, yeah. So just you're talking about padlocking your child's swing. When I was growing up, the camera crews from all over the world used to go to a place called Ballymena, where the local town council would padlock the children's swings on Sundays to stop children playing on a Sunday. And this was viewed as the ultimate cruelty and the ultimate Neanderthal thinking by these people.
It was a religious thing.
It was biblical based that you couldn't do it on Sunday. But here we have people padlocking children's swings, and they're hailed as progressive heroes.
And as Justin says, arresting a guy who was out surfing, in Huntington Beach, I think, or whatever. So as you mentioned over the weekend, so we were saying, how do we pronounce Omicron, and do we need to know how to pronounce Omicron?
I need to get like my voice changer going and pronounce it like you would, a Transformer Decepticon. There actually is a Transformer Decepticon called Omicron.
Oh God!
And of course, these are the Greek alphabet sequences that they've come up with. By the way, after they're done with the Greek letters, and they will be, they're going on to the constellations. So that should be interesting to see how they treat all of those elements there.
But hang on.
I'm really worried about Uranus.
Yeah.
The Uranus strain.
Well, no, I'm actually very worried about the fact that there's because we really hate discrimination, and I believe that some letters of the Greek alphabet have been discriminated against in this.
That's a great way to put it, and of course they didn't want to use NU, which is actually pronounced NEE, nye. And I speak a little bit of Russian and Polish, so my Cyrillic is a little bit rough, and it's not Greek Cyrillic, but the Z has its own pronunciation too. But they skipped over Z, of course, because of our great chairman over at the CCP. They didn't want to, make that a thing. As one of my good friends on Twitter, Sean Davis, noted out, every variant is a Z variant. Let's just be clear about that, right?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, people need to remember this. This came from China. This came from Wuhan, where there's the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Chinese lied about this virus for months, stopping the rest of us from trying to work out what was going on. So as you say, every variant is a Chinese variant.
The Babylon Bee, which is the best satire site on the internet, the Onion can take a bath for all I care. They had a great note, which was white smoke is seen above the laboratory at Wuhan, indicating that a successful naming of the next variant has been made.
Oh, very good, very good. So what do we know about Omicron?
Omicron. Let's get this right, guys.
You see, I told you. I said we needed to talk to you about how to pronounce it.
So look, the issue is that this first started, or we first saw the hints of these in Botswana. Now, the way that they do this is it's like a genealogical tree. I don't know if any of you have done like ancestry.com or something like that, where you've taken your DNA and done an examination of everything that's come before. And I've done that. I'm like 37% British. I've got a lot of Scandinavian. But the way they do that, right, is they go out to Ireland, they go out to Scotland, they go out to Germany, and they take samples of 1,000 people of their DNA, they sequence them, and then they say, oh, these people have these markers in this unique order, and therefore they come from this geographic location. Well, you could do the same thing with the variants. Now, not with the virus, let's be clear, with the disease, right? Because it's very hard to catch the virus and sequence that. So what they do is they say, okay, well, let's find people who have specimens of the disease, and they capture them and look at them and say, okay, well, I see that this genetic markings have this attribution, and we think that the spike protein is modified this way. And so they do a lot of stuff for laboratory analysis. And that's what brought people's concern, is that there were a bunch of little pegs in the spike protein that were modified, and they weren't quite sure, that had mutated over time. And they weren't quite sure if that indicated whether it was more susceptible, more transmissible, more lethal, what have you. So this is all based on 2 cases in Botswana and basically several dozen cases out of South Africa. And meanwhile, once they got uploaded to the database, everyone started looking at it. Now, there is one difference, which is why this is going to be in the headlines for a very long time, in that you can specify the genetic sequencing of the disease and of the virus is lengthy. It takes a bit of time to get all that sequenced out, and it takes at least a matter of days to sort of crank one of those out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not an instantaneous thing. Whereas they've figured out a way from the PCR test, that awful testing that keeps us all wrapped around the news wires as to how many cases there are the next day. They've figured out that if there's an absence of a specific marker in that PCR test, it indicates that it is the Omicron. So we'll be able to find this Omicron everywhere if it starts spreading, right? In which case they'll have headlines from here to eternity. And who knows, as Dr. Fauci said over the weekend, everything is on the table. President Biden just hours ago indicated that we're not there to lockdowns yet, but he just encouraged people to vax up and get boosted up. My guess is within the next week or two that they'll be changing the definition of fully vaccinated so that in the new year, you can join, anyone who's been vaccinated can join their great unwashed brothers and sisters among the great cases of the unvaccinated, because if you don't have a booster, you will be noted as unvaccinated.
Yes, oh God!
That's coming.
And we know, Justin, you have a small family of 8, and but some of them obviously are grown, but some of them are still in the educational system. And you're down there in San Diego. What's the scene? And I know you've spoken at some of the school board meetings. What's happening with your children now? What's the scene?
Well, our 13-year-old, we have just a few at home here, 4 at home, and 3 of them are under the age of 5. So the 13-year-old who goes to a private school, and that private school, they haven't quite, gotten the gumption to fight anything. They're hoping it goes away. They will basically do whatever the state and the county tells them to do. Now, as of Monday, according to the San Diego Unified District, anyone over the age of 16 must be fully vaccinated, but a judge just put a stay to that. And so if we can find exemptions, and there are currently abilities in California, at least on law, but they've since sort of pulled that back, to use a personal or a religious exemption to get out of vaccinating your child. Now, each of these vaccinations will come into play because California is one of the only states that says we're going to vaccinate as soon as it comes out of EUA status. So I expect for 12-year-olds that will take place at least by 2022. And for those younger, it'll take place shortly after that. And this is really sad because we have mandated vaccines, of course. I've gotten my kids, my young children who are in preschool, I've gotten them vaccines before. But those vaccines have been around for 6 to 20 years. In fact, we have never, ever in California mandated a vaccine that is younger than 6 years or even 16 to 20 years. It has to have been on the market for that long before we feel comfortable giving that approval. Yes, the vaccine has been tested on tens of thousands of people, but there is no sort of substitute. There's no cliff notes. There's no shortcut for the time factors involved with the impact a potentially new vaccine approach has on a mass of individuals there.
What are you going to do? Are you like a lot of us thinking we're going to have to leave California because of these mandates, or is that on the table at all? Or
my wife is looking up property values in Florida every other day. Yeah, and this is tough. She is. I go back 3 or 4 generations in the Bay Area. My parents are still up there. She goes back to the 1800s here in California, and so it'd be a very difficult thing for us to leave our home state. But if they basically mandate this towards our kids, I want to say, I'm always an optimist type, and I like to save California, but there are lots of indicators that it can't be saved, and that they will continue that hardline notion to keep you at bay. And look, that's a very difficult thing. Even our kids' preschool, an amazing, amazing group of people who have chosen that they can give parents the option to get their kids unmasked or not. Now, that's technically against state rules. Anyone over the age of 2 has to be masked at these preschools, which is horrendous. Our teachers know it. Our administrators know it, especially for that young. As one of our teachers told us, and she has to still wear a mask, at least technically, but we know that they try to take it off as much as possible. Where she says, try teaching a kid how to pronounce the letter H through a mask, right? And literally, I saw my kid's teacher's face for the first time the other day at a special Thanksgiving friends lunch there. And I was like, oh, you're a lot younger than I expected. And it's terrible to not have that interaction with parents and kids. And the state licensing board in California has threatened our school. They have threatened to shut down the preschool and multiple preschools here in the San Diego area unless they mask up kids. We put a shot across their bow. They've shut up for now, but that other shoe could be dropping, and that's really difficult.
And so what's happening? So is Omicron, I mean, are they going to, is there going to be a new Omicron next year? And are we, what way do you see this going? How are they going to keep this going? And what's in it for them?
Well, I think the idea is there are a lot of incentives to sort of keep it going, right? I think a lot of them don't sit around and just like, oh, I'm so excited. But there is a good contingent of supporters in their amongst their electorate, right? Amongst the people that elect them, that are very keen on virtue signaling. This is a dream for them, right? Where they have this ability to show wounds, to show that they are supportive, to show that they care, an outward sign of an inward faith, right? With the masks and everything else. And so it's almost a religious type of thing. And the politicians hear a lot from those folks, and especially on the left, all they hear is more lockdowns, more shutdowns, keep me safe. And of course, the news media feeds that by saying this is the worst disease ever and your kids could die. When they did a survey of Republicans and Democrats, and they asked Democrats how many, what percentage of people who get COVID go to the hospital, and like a third of them said half of them will all go to the hospital. Like, no, it's like less than 3 or 4%. Right? And how many people will die? Well, 1 out of 10 will die. No, it's 100 times lower than that. What's going on, right?
Yeah.
And so when the media feeds that, and the media is incentivized to keep it going, the Omicron, you saw it over the weekend. It was, the South African press and the media, or the South African actually leadership there, are dumbfounded. They're like, how did you guys take what we said and run with it like it's the apocalypse?
Yes.
The governor of New York shutting things down for elective surgeries. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah. And the lady who identified it, the doctor who identified it in South Africa, is kind of, as you said, is kind of aghast. And she's saying it's actually, the symptoms are really mild, and she can't understand it at all. I mean, it's frightening. It's extraordinary. I mean,
people's incentives are aligned towards this continuing on, and that's a very, very difficult thing to overcome, especially when 70% of the population is vaccinated against this thing. And I think here's what's really driving a lot of people not to stand up. They've sacrificed so much, right? Putting their kids in masks, pulling them out of schools, shutting down their businesses, not going to the gym, gaining weight, all those things, right? To come out now and admit that masks don't work, lockdowns don't work, this virus was not the apocalypse they thought.
Yes.
That takes a lot of saving face. And I think a lot of people aren't up for that.
I agree with you. But funny, we were at a wedding in Palm Springs this past weekend, and I just saw a little child, I would say less than 2, around 2 years old, outside at the pool wearing a mask. Heartbreaking. The other thing that I thought was very disturbing over the weekend was, I'm sure you saw that Switzerland allowed, I think the only country in the world so far that threw it back at the people and said, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to continue with this? And guess what? I was really disappointed. Huge majority, overwhelming majority of people said, yes, we want this. We want mandates. We want lockdowns. We want all of that. And because I've often wondered through all of this, that if they asked people, and I think a lot of countries don't want to ask people, places like Australia, I wonder what would happen if they asked people in Australia what they think. And Austria, where Austria, is Austria the worst place in the world now? I mean, are people moving to other countries, or what's happening?
It's crazy there. Yeah, you see these pictures of policemen beating unmasked protesters, right? And someone captured on top of that, "I'm doing this for your health," right? Yes. And it's like, what are we doing here? This is insane. And I think there is unfortunately a large contingent of people who like this motif and want to see it continued. Look, the lockdowns themselves are nonsense. Think about the 2 main features that we know lead to exacerbated severe disease and death with COVID, which is 1, obesity, and 2, we knew this early on, a lack of vitamin D. You know that Dr. Fauci takes 10,000 milligrams of vitamin D a day and never told anyone about that until like this January, right? Wow. So we know that it's a critical keeping up your vitamin D levels, which of course you usually do naturally through the sun. So whose stupid policy was it to stick us all inside, away from the sun, eating takeout so we all get fat, and then letting us out to face the virus? It's nonsense upon nonsense. And really, that's why I was really sad to see Dr. Atlas be kicked out of the White House. And of course, President Trump lost, because he was not an epidemiologist. He was not a virologist. He was a darn good health policy guy, right?
Yes.
The science is one thing. And by the way, the science is not Dr. Fauci, but applying that science over to health policy is a completely different matter, because there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And the terrible trade-offs, we're going to have to call attention to those again and make sure that people have that at the ready. To talk about the 50% of cancers that were missed in the spring because people didn't get diagnosed. Up in Canada, we have brain tumors that are in stage 3 and 4 for kids because those kids didn't get the help they needed because the parents were so scared to take them to the hospital. We have massive overdose and suicides from that effort there, the fentanyl overdoses that are coming. Everything is just pointing towards this disaster that the lockdowns perpetrated. And I think coming into the midterms, we just need to remind people of those elections. The only reason you and I aren't masked right now talking to each other by law in California is because of the recall election. It was the one benefit there. It kept him at bay when we had that small little curve there. And the numbers tell me here in the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to see that upturn in California because this is a seasonal virus and who knows what he's going to do then.
Well, I mean, I looked at the figures and we'll put that graph up now. The New York Times has a map of a hot states. And you remember back when Ron DeSantis was killing everybody in Florida, it was red. And now the red is in Michigan and they're not talking about it at all. But Florida is the color where they have no cases.
Yeah, or no death.
Because it's seasonal, because it's an indoor virus. And in Florida in the summer, you're indoor. In Florida in the winter, you're outdoor.
Yeah, and look, the vaccines, as I always say, if you're over 60 or you have some type of issues, statistically, it shows that it can actually help you stave off severe disease. There's just enough data to tell us that. Now, there are other repercussions you have to be concerned about, but if you're in the older age brackets, it's actually probably more of a risk to face it head on. But we have a lot of therapeutics. But beyond that, right, we know that the vaccination rates are very high in specific areas. The highest rate right now is in Vermont, and they're having the highest hospitalizations and the highest cases they've ever seen because the vaccines have a personal benefit. You might be able to stave off severe disease, but they do not have they have a very limited, I should say, public benefit. They do not seem to stop the curves at all. And this is something that they've all admitted because, of course, they're going for boosters. They're going for cocktails. They'll be booster 3, 4. You'll have a punch card. You'll have a subscription to Pfizer. That will keep you alive for the rest of your life. A little bit of Soma, in your hand to keep going.
Okay, Justin, I love talking to you. Where can people find you and find more of the great work that you're doing?
Well, we have a website called rationalground.com. We also have a Substack called COVID Reason. And of course, you can find this all mostly on my Twitter account. Justin_Hart is my Twitter account. We've got a lot of stuff going. We've got a new podcast on the app called Call In. We've also got a couple events coming up. This next weekend, we're going to be in New Hampshire. One of our original Rational Ground people, Emily Burns, is running for Congress, of all things, in Massachusetts. And she's running completely on a platform of take off the masks of our kids and stop the lockdowns. And so we're going to be supporting her this coming weekend and having a Rational Ground meeting out there. You can find that there. And then there may or may not be a book in the works. So we'll see.
Okay, I hear
something. What's the name of your podcast again?
It's called Rational Ground, and it's at the app called Callin, CALLIN.
CALLIN.
Okay, we'll put them up on our show notes. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Justin. This is great.
Thank you, guys.
Nice.
Take care.
All the best.
Bye.
Well, that was a great interview. So, Anne, you have a story about people moving to Texas.
So this is a fantastic story I read in the New York Times this past weekend. I just love it. So the headline caught my eye because obviously we know, living in California, that everyone is moving to Texas. And the headline was, everyone's moving to Texas. Here's why. So the traumas of the past, I'll just read the first paragraph actually. The traumas of the past few years have rearranged all of our lives. Many Americans have new needs, new desires, new possibilities and new priorities. They're looking for bigger homes, second homes or any home at all. They're searching for work, whatever. So we're here to help. First, we gathered data. So he basically, where are people going? Here's what they decided to do in the New York Times. So the first thing they did was, we started out with a list of 16,847 places that have a population of more than 1,000 people.
Because you wouldn't want to live anywhere with less.
You wouldn't. Fair. By the way, we've zero issue with that, and we can see the map that they create there, right? And so the places, the whole bunch of places comes up. The next thing they do is they look at places where I narrowed my search to places with lower unemployment and higher median incomes. And I love this because nobody wants to move to a place where all the businesses are closing. And I'm thinking, now that's hilarious, right? You know, and I mean, there's a million stories just in that paragraph.
Yes,
that
so
they're and guess what they don't do in this story? They don't tell you about places where businesses are closing
and why they're closing. But also, that I'm not sure that's the reason why he's going somewhere with low unemployment and high median incomes. You know, that's because those are really nice upper middle class places. Also,
exactly.
You know.
What's his second priority? So first priority was he wanted to go to a place where people were paid properly and where people were paid more than the average, and where there's very low unemployment. And then the second really important, and by the way, can I say that Magda is very smart. Like, she's smarter than the average, but she's not smarter than the people who work in the New York Times.
Because you know the reason.
Because you know the reason, and I mean, of course, everyone. Sorry, can I just say, everyone watching here is going to know this because you're so smart, right? The second important reason to move from California to Texas is lower climate risk, Magda. Lower climate risks. Next, I went looking for places that seemed more likely to be spared the worst of climate change's ravages, in contrast to my current home state of California.
Can I just say, anyone who says that California is experiencing climate change ravages, can you tell me if there are an increase in fires recently, which there are not, there were more in the 20s and 30s, but has anything else changed in the last 10 or 15 years? Have they changed how they manage the forests? Have they changed how they manage the fire risk? When an article gives me the data points about the 20s and 30s, and has anything changed about how they manage the forest, I will take seriously the fact that they're saying that there's an increased climate risk in California.
And can I say as well, you know, the way in Ireland you might, back in the day, you couldn't throw a stick anywhere in Ireland without hitting a pub. By the way, I think it's probably still the same. You can't throw a stick in California without hitting an environmentalist. Like, that's statistically true. So this is a place coming down with environmentalists. And yet, here the environmentalists seem to be unable to keep and they have a massive wildfire problem that is increasing. But of course, it's climate change, you see. So everything's climate change.
It could be actually an increase in environmentalists.
I think.
Funny. That's one of the reasons why he likes moving to Texas, is there's less environmentalists.
Oh, you'd be throwing a stick a long time in a lot of parts of Texas now before you'd ever hit an environmentalist.
But the idea that this is the second reason that anyone, apart from this guy. I mean, by the way, this is not the reason he wants to move to.
Magda now is laughing, by the way, can I just say?
But she's making it up.
Tornadoes in Texas?
Apparently.
Tornadoes.
She's talking about tornadoes there. And I mean, there's
of course, apparently tornadoes are now caused by climate change.
Everything's caused by climate change. The next very important reason is racial diversity.
Racial diversity. Lots of different types of Rachels.
Like a lot of Americans, I also want to live in a place that's racially diverse.
Oh, racially.
Racially diverse. So the places that have a lot of best matches, just let me finish this. Best matches for racial diversity. I love this, by the way, right? When you think of the way that Texas is described by people, Plano, Texas, Irvine, Texas, McKinley, Texas, Frisco, Texas, Elk Grove, California, never been there, Carlton, Texas, and Richardson, Texas. The best matches in the country for racial diversity, racial diversity are in Texas. Okay, the next really important thing to him, way down the list, affordability. Finally, and he says it himself. Now, Magda, I'm going to go way out on a limb here and say that I think that he actually got the whole thing, as they say in Ireland, very politely, arse ways. So, in fact, affordability and things to do with money would be very high on most people's list, right?
Well, also there's things he's not talking about, like crime.
Oh, we're not going to get there yet. Finally, I filtered out places with high housing prices. I'm fed up with my state's impossible cost of living. Now, I would love to ask him a question here. I'd love to ask this fella here now. Who do you think is responsible for the impossible cost of living in California? I'd love to know who's blaming.
Would it be the large number of environmentalists in California?
I think it could be the large number.
That won't allow you to build anything.
It's very funny though, he doesn't go there. But as you say, one of the things that gets really little, and then at the bottom, once I had put in all my priorities, I was left with a list of cities and towns near Dallas that checked all my boxes. Yes. I was starting to see why so many people are moving to Texas. Can I just tell everyone here, we have two sets of friends. Well, we've got lots of sets of friends who've moved to Texas, but there's two that come to mind. Recently. And one, I can tell you, Brian, I'm looking at you. I don't think Brian, I would challenge whether any of those were high on Brian's list, by the way, of what he just mentioned.
I think, I remember he lived up by, let's just say, the middle of LA.
Near the Grove,
Near the Grove. And one of his biggest problems was it was BLM Central, and he was going. He had a pistol in his house, and he was realizing that when the rioters came through his door, the pistol wouldn't be enough, and he had to go out and buy a rifle. And when you're at that level of having to buy a rifle because the pistol isn't enough in your own house, that's time to leave.
And Magda had friends, by the way, who had a little baby, and they were living very much in a similar sort of zone. And then at night, either the helicopters trying to find the bad guys would be hovering over their house, or there'd be BLM protesters and rioters and looters going on downstairs from their apartment.
Or lawless people racing cars.
And their baby waking up continuously in the middle of the night. That basically, and they left for that. And then the other people I'm thinking about, the couple who've just left with their children and they've gone to Austin, Texas, their prime reason for leaving was their children, was the future of their children and the kind of schooling that was going to be available and the kind of people actually. Their issue was the kind of people they were going to have to be spending far too much time with.
Well, it was, the parents of their children and the schooling. The schooling was just going to be... they knew what their children were going to learn, and that wasn't. They thought should not be taught at school. It should be taught at home. But
I think you should read. It's almost worth reading the whole article. We're not going to read the whole article to you. But what's really funny is they literally don't mention, like, law and order is mentioned, crime is mentioned
in the second last paragraph.
Is mentioned in a sentence where there's like 7 things. So it doesn't even get a sentence to itself. But climate change gets about 6 paragraphs. I'm not joking, by the way. Now, they're not going to leave immediately. As this writer says, if I was 10 years younger, if my kids weren't settled at their schools and my wife wasn't tied to a job in California, I'd feel a lot differently. And when you hear this is very depressing. For the people who are in Texas now, this is kind of depressing, I think, this paragraph. Texas now feels a lot like California did when I first moved here in the late 80s. A thriving, dynamic place where it doesn't take a lot to establish a good life. For many people, that's more than enough. And the reason I say it's depressing is, and it's something, as I think Magda, when she came back, Magda went to Texas recently and she said that they have these bumper stickers on the back of cars and people on T-shirts saying, don't California my Texas. And that's actually a massive problem because that's what happened to Colorado. They California'd Colorado. They've kind of California'd Arizona. If they California Texas, I don't know where there is left to go. I suppose they haven't California'd Florida yet.
Well, they almost did. They almost got away with it. Actually, Florida was on the precipice. Florida used to be a 50-50 state, and then a couple of Republicans won in it, and and then Trump got elected, and that I think that has made Florida very much in the red zone. But they almost went the other way,
Yeah, it's an amazing story. It's one of those it's a typical New York Times story that tells a story that misses the story, like completely misses the
deliberately,
story.
I think.
And on the crime thing, it's really appalling that they don't mention the crime situation here, which is really, really awful. There has been again over this past weekend, a ton of looting at high-end stores and it's a coordinated thing where people drive up in cars, 10, 20 people, and go in and just lift everything.
And you're not allowed to mention the fact that, and the cops mysteriously don't arrive for 15 or 20 minutes, but you're never allowed to mention that this is all carried out by young black men. And of course the cops don't want to arrive because the only way to stop these young black men, very fit young black men, is to cause, injury to them. And then you have cops on video facing at the end of their career or an assault charge. So cops arrive late, they go in, they steal, and they know that if they take less than $1,000 worth of stuff, that they won't get done for theft, and if they get caught, and the cops won't come because it's just not worth it for them. So this is, and that's all California, the wonderful state of California. But this guy doesn't mention that, and that's just the big headline crimes. There's also all these petty crimes. It's just rampant, petty, quality of life crimes, like stealing everything that isn't nailed down because they won't be prosecuted. And also we've got these progressive bail laws now, so that if you do get prosecuted for something, you're out the same day. So this just makes it unlivable for a lot of people, especially people with young families. So that, Mr. New York Times reporter, is why people are leaving California, not what you said.
And I love Twitter for one reason, which is that you can come across extraordinarily interesting things because you can have Twitter friends who and thousands of them, people who you follow, and they report on things that are amazing. And this story, which isn't a new story, but it's a new story to me, and I thought it might be a new story to you, and I thought it was really extraordinary. What do you think was the greatest photograph ever taken in the 20th century? We're going to just show this now, and this is a photograph in the night. Let me read this paragraph. In the 1950s, a photojournalist, Leonard Nielsen, set out to capture the earliest stages of existence. His fetus images seized the public imagination and sparked controversy. This is from the Guardian, by the way. That has raged ever since.
Why would that be controversial?
Yeah, well, I think we possibly know why it could become controversial. So this is an 18-week-old fetus. Look at this extraordinary photograph that this man took. And by the way, this photograph, and I'm going to put this up now, was also featured. It was featured on the front page of Life magazine. And if you remember, Phelim, after our book came out, after the Gosnell book came out and did so well in the first week that it came out, sold out in all the places where it was available, we got invited to the White House to a reception, which was really extraordinary, with Vice President Mike Pence. And he invited other people involved in the pro-life movement. And when he made his speech, he talked about the cover of the Life magazine. When that cover of the Life magazine came out, that he gathered his family around him and said, "We're going to go to Washington to save the babies," and that basically that the way he certainly described it, it seems to me that photograph completely changed his life trajectory, and I bet it did to an awful lot of people. So what was interesting was that the man who took that photograph was Scandinavian,
Mr. Nielsen.
Mr. Nielsen, he didn't actually sort of think about the photograph at all in any way politically. He just wanted to have, I had this idea of taking these photographs, these extraordinary photographs that no one had ever managed to take before. I mean, one of the interesting things about the story is that he took a whole series of photographs, and I think only in one case was the child actually alive. He worked near an abortion clinic, and a lot of the photographs were children who had been aborted, or children. He worked with hospitals as well, where there was children who'd been miscarried. But I think what's really amazing is that this is a baby at 18 weeks. And one thing that was interesting recently that I was reading about, and sometimes you forget things that are really important. People talk about how progressive Scandinavia is, and it's very socialist and super, super progressive. Nowhere in the world has abortion laws like the United States of America, where you can have an abortion up to 9 months. Also the United Kingdom, by the way, where you can have an abortion right up to the very end of pregnancy if the child has a cleft palate. We've mentioned this before, cleft palate, clubfoot, or Down syndrome. Really barbaric kind of laws. But the most barbaric laws probably anywhere are here in the United States, in Canada, China, and North Korea. It's kind of nice, an extraordinary club to be a part of, really,
Yeah,
when you look at these photographs, I just think there is something extraordinary about this. The controversy that the Guardian referred to is, and I dug around a bit, and I didn't get the answer to this, but I think we might see it just in a couple of factoids. So this man, I think what I get from reading this is that this man created these photographs in a very pure sense. He just was fascinated by the beginnings of life, by the human form, by the journey of the child from conception to birth. He was just obsessed with that, and he actually has a number of books that became massive, massive bestsellers. And then his step-granddaughter, I think his step-granddaughter, started to work with him. And, they travelled around a bit, whatever, but they came to discover that the pictures were being used politically. And so the pro-life movement, of course described here in The Guardian as the anti-abortion movement, the pro-life movement did use these images and said, well, this is what it looks like. This is what you're planning to destroy in abortion. And they showed these pictures, and they used these pictures, which resulted in him stopping allowing these photographs to be used in anything other than in exhibitions. I just thought the photographs were extraordinary, and I think maybe, we need more of them, actually, and maybe somebody else should go along and take these photographs again.
Clinics won't let you. Hospitals won't let you. That's the thing. I think it was 1965. He was probably up in Scandinavia somewhere, and abortion was probably just accepted as normal, and he was probably just treated as a photographer of interest. Hospitals wouldn't. He went there. They would have probably have seen it as not controversial then.
Yes.
And because it was just telling the truth.
Until they realised the import
the
of
power,
it.
The
power of it.
Yeah.
And I think these photographs need to be, recreated or republished as much as possible, because I think they're the strongest possible argument against abortion, certainly abortion at that stage. I mean, look at that child at 18 weeks, and people would consider that very early. I've heard doctors, by the way, say that 18 weeks, it's a blob. Doesn't look like much of a blob to me now.
No.
I have to say there. And these are, and by the way, for any of you watching this, look this up and look at the other photographs in the sequence that he created.
So, next on the show, Anne.
Sorry, the two of us are a bit under the weather, by the way. We spent the weekend in Palm Desert at a wedding.
Yeah.
And both of us have got some kind of an allergy since that. Either that or COVID. Probably not COVID, though, because I think apparently a runny nose is not a COVID thing, right? Though Magda says everything's COVID now.
I think so. So. Anyway, I just wanted to talk with Josh Fox, who is the director of Gasland, the Gasland documentary, and has made a play/movie called The Truth Has Changed. He's very concerned with the truth. He just posted on Instagram over the weekend, "It's clear to me that participating daily in mainstream capitalism warps your sense of truth. If you spend all day doing graphic design for, say, Live Nation's rewards program or ad copy for Exxon, and you think that's totally okay, you're probably lying to yourself in many other ways." Okay. Tough talk there, Josh. Tough. I mean, you're the man. Then Josh Fox tweeted he posted right after that, "Time to go back to New Orleans right now, and all the crabs and the crawfishing, right?" So Josh Fox has a home. Did you know this? He has a home in New York. He has a home in Pennsylvania.
That's nice.
And he has a home in New Orleans.
Lovely. So he must have done a bit of that capitalism then,
He must have done a bit of that capitalism. And you know what? He definitely does a bit of that flying.
Oh, do you know what
and driving.
Do you know what I want to add
and
here?
using Exxon's products.
Do you know what I want to add here is, and I wish I'd found, funny, I captured it over the weekend and forgot, but Ibram X. Kendi, whose book sold a gazillion copies, said something even more succinct than this.
Yes.
He says, capitalism makes racism makes capitalism, right? Guess how much he gets for a Zoom, so sitting in his own home, in the comfort of his own home. How much does he get for a speech sitting at his own computer?
$10,000.
Incorrect, Phelan McAleer. Go to the back of the class.
For an hour Zoom. Okay.
$20,000. God bless us. Would you pay the man properly at least, right? So, do you know what? I want his kind of whatever that is that's not capitalism. I like the sound of that. And by the way,
I think we'd all like the sound of that.
And by the way,
why doesn't he
charge $1,000? Like, why doesn't he charge $500?
Why doesn't he give all the money away to poor people?
Well, I'm sure he does that now, Phelan. No, I'm sure he does that. Don't be even going there now.
Don't be even thinking such a thing.
But I do like that. I do like these people who are anti-capitalist, who are really, really capitalist. I always tell you that example that always drives me nuts of Julia Child. So Julia Child, of The Art of French Cooking, the book that sold whatever number gazillion copies. And she started out by, she met these two French women and she learned how to cook from them. But she also did go to the whatever the whatever.
And
the
she
place
wrote
was.
the first book with a French woman, didn't she?
She did write but anyway, long story short, they made a film called Julie and Julia, and about a woman called Julia who decided to read through the whole book and make every recipe from Julia Child's book in a year. And it's kind of a funny story with Amy Adams is in it. Yeah. But the movie has all these anti-capitalist moments in it. But then I started to get really interested in Julia Child. Julia Child spoke ill of her father for him being a capitalist and then asked him for money. And she would take money while she was grown up and married to a diplomat living in France. She would be asking her evil dad to give her money to buy a nice coat. And the other thing that she did, which I thought was kind of extraordinary, and I still have to get someone to explain it to me, she did a deal. Actually, there's two parts to this. She did a deal with Knopf, the famous publishing house, that has never been done by any. She did a deal for her book that no other writer has managed to get a similar deal since. The best deal ever made. So So she's pretty good at the old capitalism. And what she got was, and I'm not going to say the numbers because I'm going to get it wrong, but she got a percentage of the gross.
Yeah.
No one gets a percentage of the gross in a publishing deal ever. But she got it way back in the day and became a gazillionaire, right? So she became a gazillionaire. She had a house in France. She sold the house in France. She threw the women that she had met there a little bit under the bus now in terms of her publishing. She moves back and lives in Montecito, as you know all want to do, by the way. Lovely living in Montecito.
Before Meghan was there?
She has the husband and he starts to get old. And you know what she does? Instead of having round-the-clock nurses with her gazillions and gazillions of dollars, she puts them in a home.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was kind of an unusual thing. She came across to me as quite a cold-hearted type.
Yes.
But any of you who know better, write in and tell me that I'm wrong. But I've always been a bit annoyed with her, particularly for the way she spoke ill of her dad and took money off him.
Yes.
If you don't like your dad, don't be asking him for money. And if you
if
you think he's an evil capitalist, particularly don't be taking his money.
Remember, she took him on a trip of Europe. You know, her capitalist dad,
yeah.
And he was very into. All he was interested in was how people were making a living.
Oh yeah, fair enough.
You know, it's actually very interesting. Like, what's the economy of this village we're driving through, this town?
Fair enough.
How do they? You know, of course, he was fascinated with that. She just found that so gauche,
so pedestrian.
Yes, yeah.
That'd be like my mother.
And then she asked for money.
That'd be like my mother. My mother, you know, anytime you'd be watching television and there'd be like a big castle or something, or a really large house. My mother's thing always was the same. God, I wonder how they heat those rooms.
And who cleans the
and
bathroom?
who cleans the bathrooms? That was the second one. The first one was, how would you heat that house? Which, by the way, is a really good point. And the second one was, who'd clean those bathrooms? You know, and these are the really important questions, by the way.
Yes.
You know, these are the imponderables that we're all working on.
Well, we'll be.
That's
working
why we
on
live
them.
in a really small house with very limited number of bathrooms.
Which is a cold house.
This house is very cold. Outside it's warm, but inside here it's very cold. But just to summarise and to remind everyone, please, if you can, coming to the end of the year, we are very dependent, by the way, on keeping the lights on here from the donations that you send. So if it was a good year for you, and I really hope it was, please do remember to give what you can to the unreportedstoriesociety.com. The projects we take on are very high dollar projects. So obviously beyond that, we still have to.
But no one else is doing them. No one else is doing them.
Nobody else is doing this. Nobody else is doing anything like
no one did the 𝙤𝙤 movie. No one did the 𝙤𝙤 book. No one did it as a true crime book and got it out to a true crime audience. No one's doing the Hunter Biden story. No one did the FBI lovebird story. No one, made a laughing stock of Strzok and Page. These are the things you do. These are entertaining, accessible, very funny. I was at the wedding in Palm Springs at the weekend, and I met a woman from Bosnia-Herzegovina and
Banja
Luka, and she was very interested, and she says, my son, who lives in Banja Luka, is a Republican. He's obsessed with American politics, and he's a Republican. We're looking at, why are you a Republican? She can't understand it, and he's going, because it's the truth, Mom, right? So she then says, maybe he's heard of you guys, and I says, ask him, has he heard of FBI lovebirds? And she texted FBI lovebirds. He goes, oh yeah, he does that with his wife. So this guy in Bosnia had heard of our work and has watched. He said, I watched it a year ago. So people, this work gets far and wide, and people listen to it and like it and learn.
And it's forever.
So please give what you can on reportedstoriesociety.com or mysonhunter.com. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.